This week, I try to transmute a noob into a fan.
And I try to make lust my waifu.
Hi, I'm Kyle.
And I'm Garrett.
And we watch anime. Now, this episode, more than anything, is a real test of our show's ability to hold back a noob's fandom of one of his favorite properties. Because I think ultimately, when I gave you this episode, it got me really giddy. This is one of my favorite shows, and it's like the best representation of that show. So, what I'm going to do more than anything this episode is just kind of hear vicariously you experiencing it for the first time and try not to geek out on you. So, Garrett, what did you think of FullMetal Alchemist Brotherhood? Just your initial few thoughts on it.
I thought it was pretty effing awesome.
Yeah, good.
I thought it was pretty cool. It was everything that I would want out of a adventure, mystery, dramatic, but also with a nice amount of levity so that you don't feel just totally downtrodden like watching an episode of Criminal Minds and you just really want to crawl into a hole.
Or even worse show, Cold Case.
There's always still moments.
Like I was also bringing up, like it's just like Cold Case where like everything's blue and every slow motion moving down the stairs, and they're all like looking at the ghost, going, "I got you." Like that's when you're like, okay.
And you hear that version of Hallelujah.
Yeah. They have to have done that at least 3 times during that series.
To end an episode, they play a date appropriate song that was like popular, and they always end it with Jeff Buckley's version of Hallelujah.
And it was always like, and they always had to like look at the ghost and it's like, I'm still dead and I'm probably evaporating into nothingness, but thank you anyway.
I'm avenging you.
Yes. So it's nothing like that. That's good.
Right. So back to the anime. FullMetal Alchemist. So Kyle tasked me this week with watching FullMetal Alchemist Brotherhood. Now, when I was growing up as a teenager, I remember, much like I remember with the first anime we watched, Cowboy Bebop, seeing advertisements for FullMetal Alchemist on TV. It might have been on Comedy Central. That's where so many of these things got their start in America. Right. But this had the subtitle Brotherhood. And I said, Kyle, is this a sequel? Should I actually be watching the original FullMetal Alchemist first? But as it turns out, the first FullMetal Alchemist, as most of you, probably all of you know out there, anime
explain it to us as if we've heard it for the manga.
Yeah. So anime is based on manga. So all these start as sort of for lack of a better term, a comic strip of sorts, a manga, and then they often get interpreted in TV shows. The first FullMetal Alchemist never saw its way to completion, as I understand it. And so several years later, when a production company in Japan saw the opportunity, they redid the entire series. And Kyle, I think, will be the first to tell you that it's absolutely superior than the original version.
I think superior in the fact that it stays true to the original manga's intent of where they wanted to go with it. When you watch the anime now, we can call it the 2003 anime versus the 2009 anime. The 2003 anime had to guess a lot. Like the lore of what FullMetal Alchemist is all about had to kind of get decided on the fly in the first 2003 anime. And you watch Brotherhood, and it's a completely different story with completely different characters who honestly are different personalities all around. Like the homunculus are different people. The Kimberly, who's the Crimson Alchemist we meet in the first episode, is a kind of a different personality. Like he's kind of a psycho in the 2003, but he's like more of a gentleman assassin in the second one. So I think for me, it's important to note that while I do say that this is the best representation of FullMetal Alchemist, I'm not going to shirk the immediate impact the 2003 anime had on me, because the 2003 anime did something really important for like a young kid such as myself who wanted to think, who was a very deep thinker, and it did a lot for my ability to like what anime is. Much like Cowboy Bebop, it made me respect it and see it as something I could watch, not just in secret because it had weird panty shots and all that stuff.
So as I understood it, because episode 1, so I watched 4 episodes for those at home who want to know how deep I had to go in order to have this discussion. And I had zero background, did not know plot, did not know history of the show, nothing. I'm flying blind, as I will be in almost every episode of our podcast. So as I understand it, alchemists are sort of they're sort of godlike scientists. They have an ability to accomplish feats of science that other people would not be able to, whether that means the ability to change materials or to control materials. And each alchemist seems to have their own specialty, something that they are unique in their abilities. And many of these alchemists end up getting jobs for the government, and they become what's known as state alchemists. So what we're following is these 2 lead characters, our younger brother, the Eric brothers, correct?
Elric,
right?
Yeah.
Alphonse and
Edward.
And Edward, yes. And so we hop right in. The first episode is a total adventure episode. You get no background. They just say, you're going to be getting a whole lot of this going forward. There's a bad guy. They're chasing a bad guy. They're kind of talking about like transmutation circles, and you're like, what the hell's a transmutation circle?
They give you a lot of lore like right up front. It's like you're watching it's like you're watching the Hunger Games and be like, and then there's the cornucopia, and then there's the this thing, and they give you all like the language of it right up front, and you're just like sitting there going like, okay, so what's a what? I'm like, what's happening?
Right. And by that, I think if you can hang on, and it's not that hard to hang on.
No.
But if you can hang on, I think the first episode is a really good hook.
Right.
Because they don't bore you with the minutia. And then when you hit the second episode and it starts to introduce you some of the backstory, where are the protagonists coming from, the Eric brothers, and you start to get a deeper understanding of, their personal trials and tribulations. And so that was a little bit more slowly paced. Episode 3 was back to sort of the benefits of having these alchemists and how they can root out evil. Of course, we're watching sort of like the action adventure. I'm sure there's many alchemists that work for the state that just sit in a freaking laboratory all day trying to make science happen.
And when you meet Show Tucker, the 4th episode alchemist, you meet one of those, Show Tucker.
Right. Show Tucker, which it always like, I don't know the reasoning behind this, but it always just amazes me. They have no reason to pick Euro or Americanized names, but the fact that like the characters' names are like Edward and Alphonse and Shao, which is not European, but Tucker, or one of them, their name is McDougal, and you're like, really?
It's another
Japanese man named McDougal. Fantastic.
So yeah, I mean, so.
I don't know how much you want me to get into it. If you can give people a little bit more nuanced understanding in the show, and I'm happy to provide my feedback because it was awesome.
Yeah. I think that was a good summary, because I think when you think about FullMetal Alchemist Brotherhood, because they know that enough people know about the story in general, before either they're manga readers or they watch the 2003 anime, with this particular... so with the arc of the story, what they did is, they introduce you to this. You're going to be on it for a wild ride in episode 1. In episode 2, you're going to basically learn that this is very tragic what happened to them, but they're resolved to fix it. Then the 3rd episode is like, they're here for a benefit, so know that there's a reason why State Alchemist exists. And the 4th episode completely subverts it and makes you realize that there's more muckiness to this idea of playing God. And I think that, to me, was a good summary of like the entire show in like the first 4 episodes. I really appreciate them doing that. But before I get into more of like my thoughts on it, if you were to look at these 4 episodes, Garrett, and I've seen a lot more, how would you qualify this? Like, if you were to say make hashtags or tags for this show, what would you call it? Right. I had that
mainly for like an American audience, they would have no idea what a FullMetal Alchemist was.
No.
So like, what would you call it?
Because it's got a little bit of action, right? It's an adventure because they're going around all over the place. It's a little bit of a comedy, right? It's very much
also like massive moral
Right.
like questions.
Very
arise.
philosophical, right? It also
Yeah.
introduces a lot of body horror layered in it, so it's kind of a horror genre too, because you're seeing all the failure and the evil that comes with playing with this magic. And it's also like, yeah, it builds into philosophy. It builds into it's kind of anti-war. It's also anti, subjugation, imperialism. It's so many different things at once, but no way, shape, or form did I feel like they were doing too much at the same time.
Right. Well, and that's sort of, they piece it out, right? So,
Right.
like, even I know that we're talking about how many episodes is it total, approximately?
Oh, for this one, I believe is about, I think they're about
50?
4 or 5 seasons. So yeah, probably about 50.
Okay. Well, in the first 4 episodes, they sort of, I mean, they give you the lay of the land. They're never going to lay too much on you at one time, but they let you know where they're going to go.
Right.
And if you're not down with that, there's a really early exit off the highway.
You give them the chop, and you say, "Go away." No. And I think that to me is like the real craziness of it. Like, I'm jokingly call it, it's not the Imagine Dragons of anime, in which it tries to be everything at once and then it ends up being nothing. It's actually coherent and it has a direction. It's not following anything. Like, I don't think there's other anime that's like it. It's very gothic, which I really think is cool. It as you were mentioning, it very much leans into the Europeanness of it. It's based on
half the characters are blonde, yeah.
Right, half the characters are blonde. It's based on actually the Prussian Empire, from what I've read online. So like that's why they use words like Führer is a big name that's used a lot, and this is like that. So it's got that kind of Proto-Germanic style of it, which I think is really cool. The iconography is very, Germanic and Prussian, and it's like something that you don't really get touched on very often. Like, only few anime actually try to like truly present that kind of like old European style. That and maybe Golden Kamuy is the only one. So I think the 4 episodes is a good representation of the show. It's a good way of whetting your appetite. I'm not going to lean into spoiler territory for those who have not watched, even though it's more than 10 years old, this anime. But I think for me, it's important to kind of piece together the things that I like about it, the categories that I think really touch into it. And I laid a few out for us before, but I think the first one is the God complex that comes from these scientists and the kind of superiority that comes from it. And I think that is like a thread that gets pushed really well. And to see it through kind of and you forget that Edward's a child in this show. Like, he's like 12, 13, maybe.
Oh, is he 14? That young?
He's young. He's not that old.
Oh, no, I think he was 11 when the incident happened. He's in his teens. It was 3 years after. Right.
It's 3 years after the incident in which they tried to transmute their mother. Spoiler alert, if you hadn't watched either anime. Spoiler alert. So it's the first 2.
It's in the first 2 episodes.
I'm sorry if I ruined it for you.
Ruined the end of it.
Yeah. And so with this story, it being he's still really young, seeing him go over the moral complexes of having intelligence, having ability, having these kind of real, as I say, godlike powers, and how much of a god complex that can give you. And I think that's a really cool thread that I think gets pulled here, because when it comes to Edward, it's weird. Like, and this is another thing that I just like, I get really weird about, is like, is he actually an atheist because he like makes himself seem like an atheist? But like, if I'm a dude who goes to like this kind of pseudo limbo, meet a god physically, and that god gives me powers by removing my leg and arm, I to myself should be like, yeah, maybe there's something there to this religion thing, But he's like, there's no God, only we're God, as he was telling the fake preacher. And I'm like, and I remember that always sat with me like, what? You actually met God, like, why you? So that was just like a thing. But did that kind of theme run its course with you? Like everybody who has power uses it in their own way, and that justifies whatever they do, right?
Right. Well, there's that old saying. I mean, absolute power corrupts absolutely.
Right.
And so I think everyone who has this power, like anyone who has any ability in the real world that we live in, you have the opportunity to use that for good or to use it for bad, and you let that define you in the choices that you make. you know. And I feel like we might along the way meet like a lot of peripheral characters that just sort of have a cool power that they throw in, and there's not much depth to them, but the ones that will be the central to the story, I think it's really going to peel away the layers of like the human condition and how anyone can be corrupted, like we see in you know, episode 4 in One Man's Thirst for Power.
Right. And to maintain that power, because you remember, he got that power by, spoiler alert, basically murdering his wife and their family pet. That's the first reason he got his thing. He originally became the sowing life alchemist by essentially murdering his wife. He had all this power, money, and resources, and he was running out of time. He failed the first exam, and now he had to go to the second exam. He had to prove his mettle, and we'll get into that episode a little bit more, but it's also like to take it one episode earlier with Colonello, the preacher, which, by the way, this is where it diverts from the 2003 anime. It starts on episode 3 in the 2003 anime. Like, you start with Edward kind of starting his journey in that town, and that's kind of how it starts.
Leor.
Right. But what I think 2003 really leans into, and why I really loved it and what really got me inspired by it, is that it just followed Edward consistently bumping into people who made a mistake with what they were doing. So the difference between 2003 anime, for example, with Colonello, is he's just like, he's kind of a douche, for lack of a better term. In what you've watched, at the worst, what he's doing is tricking people. That's what he's doing. Yeah. But in the 2003 anime, the woman that you meet there, I think her name's Claire, Rose. Or something like that. Rose, thank you. She, Rose, already is now working for Colonello, and in order for her to stick with them, Colonello says that she's already revived his boyfriend, and she keeps going into this bedroom, and the man is sitting there going, and like, he's like, oh, he's weak. You know, I've done my best, but you got to give him time to rest and relax. So keep doing my dirty work, and you'll have your your boyfriend. And what you find out later, and this was like one of those like, oh my God, this show's amazing, is she was like, I got to see what my boyfriend looks like. And my whole faith is falling apart on me. She opens the curtain, and it's not her boyfriend. He transmuted a parrot to sound like her boyfriend. And it's just this giant, like, freak monster bird going, Rose! Right? And I'm just like, this show's blown my mind. It was, and that's the 2003 anime. It does a lot of that. Like, and this is not going to happen when you continue watching this. There's a guy in that show who, for the longest time, was killing women to bring back his wife who died in a crash. But then you find out, and this is very Sweeney Todd, that this like ugly beggar who got older and was just trying to get his attention this whole time was actually his wife, who was trying to get back and like figure out this is her, but she just got deformed and disfigured from her time and also got older. Wow. And so he was just so enamored with her, what his thought she was, that they just like burned the whole lab down, and her and him with them. So it's like, it does a lot of that like Frankenstein tragedy that I think just like, and you're going to get a lot more of that in the show. Once again, I feel like I'm blurting out my fandom, but it's like one of those things that I think really peels the onion of what FullMetal Alchemist is. So yeah. No,
it's fine. I mean, it's literally to everyone out there listening. I mean, we're only talking about the first 4 episodes. Right. These are the things you're faced with discussing. I mean, if you really want to think about it, you can always take things for face value and be like, oh, whoa, cool show, that's an adventure. Or you could really deep dive and peel back the layers. Really incredible stuff.
I honestly think you could do a thesis on the themes of FullMetal Alchemist, much like you could any book. It's that well written. Another theme that I pull out for us is the idea of like loyalty versus morality. So throughout this entire time, the Elric brothers are loyal to the government specifically because it meets their end. But throughout the course of
which, by the way, their end is to try and get back their bodies.
Get back their bodies, right. So they are even though they're just children, they're not innocent in any of this stuff. But they're finding out that they'll find out more and more, and I'm not going to get to spoiler territory, is that the government's way worse than what they're going on. So it's this idea of fitting your own personal morality and your own personal decision on why you're doing things versus like, do you just keep doing? How long do you stay on this wheel before you have to figure out you have to get off, which I think is a really cool thread that this thing does as well. And I think another thread that I think is really cool is the innocence of youth and having to grow up. And like, you find that like through these characters that like they have to grow up really quickly, and it's just really cool how they kind of frame that stuff. So which episode
you get that a lot in 3 and 4, but in particularly 4,
right?
when,
Let's jump into that one.
Edward is there with like the dawning of information that he's receiving and processing, and the camera shot is only his eye and his pupil dilating and undilating as he's taking this information and realizing things are not always as they seem, and really having to, and then his reaction to it is like this explosive, violent reaction, and he has to like pull it back. And again, this is like his immaturity, showing, but he's trying to conquer it all at once.
Right.
So yeah, absolutely.
And so let's talk about the 4th episode for a little bit, because while the first 3 were like immensely entertaining and really set the table, I think this was the first time I actually like almost cried watching an anime. And I think that was, I jokingly, I don't know if you watch Game of Thrones, Garrett, but I call it the red wedding of anime. Like when you're introducing someone to this new property and then that they're going to hit this wall of like this really messed up episode or this really messed up topic. That is going to be something that like you're just like waiting for them to hit it, like you're setting them off into the world, and then you're just waiting for that moment where they just like bump their face into the red wedding or bump their face into episode 4. That you can kind of take them off the ledge, be like, yeah, I was there too. Yeah, it was a rough one. But talk me through what happens in episode 4 and what you felt about it.
Well, I'm gonna stay pretty surface level because I want to be honest with you. You sort of gave me a warning that this episode might upset my wife. Before
she loves
I
dogs.
Watched it.
She loves dogs. She loves animals.
But at the end of it, when I tried to explain it to her, not practicing for the podcast or anything, but I found that I actually couldn't find like the adequate words to describe it. So I'm gonna stay very surface level because I really would like the viewer to or the listener to watch it and sort of feel it themselves for the first time. But so the episode kicks off with Edward and Alphonse being brought to the home of this other alchemist, Sho Tucker. Right? And Sho Tucker is known as the life sewing alchemist. He's known for this because he's had his alchemy title. And when you get your title, you get this little like pocket watch that like it's like retiring from the police, but you get this pocket watch, and it's like, hey, you're an alchemist now. Yeah. Right. And so he got his alchemy title by creating a chimera, which is a prominent character in these episodes because a chimera actually made an appearance in episode 3 as well.
Episode 3 is relevant.
But the reason why they bring them out there is, as we've learned, Edward and Alphonse. Edward wants to regain his arm and his leg. Alphonse wants to regain his body, which I know we haven't discussed this yet, but Edward and Alphonse are brothers. And very early on, we find out in the 2nd episode that they tried to create or commit an act called human transmutation, which is taboo among alchemists. Essentially, their mother died when they were young, and they tried to bring their mother back to life, which the result was horrific, which included the younger brother, Alphonse, losing his body. And fortunately, Edward was able to attach his soul to this suit of armor. Yes. So this show is a young blonde teenager and his brother who looks like the Iron Giant with like a little samurai tail.
And he kind of has a high-pitched Michael Jackson voice all the time.
Well, because he's 11 years old. Yeah. But you're right. The contrast with a giant robot-looking creature and the 11-year-old's voice is funny at times. But the government, and again, the more we talk about this, we talk about how the government is bad or can be bad and can manipulate you, which we know very much in real life. They bring these two out to see this alchemist, Sho Tucker, because he has a library based upon human transmutation stuff, experiments, all this. So they welcome them out there to do their research and see if there's anything that might help them, which I guess is sort of government stringing them along, keep doing things for us, and we're going to keep giving you bits of cheese so that you believe that we're in your favor.
Right.
And so this alchemist Show Tucker is working on a project about generally about creating chimeras that have human-like intelligence or near human intelligence, and he's nearing his second test, and it gets, I don't know, man, it gets really happy for like a second, and then it goes dark.
It goes very
so dark.
Yeah. And I think,
I mean, I don't know how much I even want to reveal, because it's just like it hits you like a punch in the face the first time you see it, you know.
And I think the weird thing about, well, not the weird thing, and much like the Red Wedding, and this will be my last Game of Thrones reference for the night, is with this particular thing, and I think what really stuck with me was the idea that the resolution was just going to end sad. And actually it ended worse with the mercy killing of the Chimera.
It ended worse than sad.
Yeah. And like they're just like, oh man, now there's this, you know, we're going to go back to spoiler territory, but like, you know, he transmutes his daughter and their family pet into this chimera, and that's how he's been doing it before. He did it with his wife and his actual dog before, and it's got the innocence of his child. She doesn't know the chimera doesn't know what happened to it. It just wants to play, and it's just like, imagine,
please her father.
Right, exactly. And
you know what kills me is the night before, and so the reason why he ends up transmuting them. So I guess we're just deep diving.
Oh yeah, just go for it. Yeah,
the reason why he's transmuting them is because the day before, when he's talking with the Eric brothers, and he's practically having a breakdown, and he's saying, before I had my alchemist title, we were poor, I can't go back to that life. And it's very clear that he is hyper focused on work, and that his daughter is suffering because of it, because he can't lose this. And then again, this goes to beware the person with the ambition to gain power, because they will become more ambitious to keep that power. Right.
Exactly.
And so what kills you is, once you look at it in hindsight, the night before, he turns to his daughter and he says, would you like to play with daddy tomorrow? And she's like, yay, I get to play with daddy. And it's like, you son of a bitch.
Right. It's hard to find villains that you can automatically understand their villainy and not in a cartoony way. Like, you can be like, this is a human being who got pushed into this limit, and he decided to take a very stark act to get there. And when you get to that, you're like, oh god, this is terrible. Like, he transmuted his daughter's now this like chimera beast. And you meet Scar for the first time in this episode, who ends up being kind of the major antagonist, or one of like the deuterogenists, that I would call it.
Now, before you get into this, Scar, we do see him a little earlier in the episode. He's sort of the string that runs through this. They introduce him as this mysterious character who is randomly popping up and killing state alchemists. And he implies before each of their deaths that sort of by joining up with the state, they're going against God's will. And then he touches their face and their ears and eyes explode blood. So he shows up.
Yeah, so he's the kind of like the serial killer throughout the show, but and he's kind of a antagonist. I say deuterogenous because, you know, you start to learn the threads of the government afterwards. But he mercy kills the chimera child, and you're in your brain, and you have to go through this yourself, the morality in your own brain as a viewer, to go, yeah, it makes sense. I mean, I bet this is really painful for her to be living like this. There's no guarantee of a good quality of life.
It's an abomination of nature.
Right. And so it makes sense. And so you, like, at one point you're like, how dare you do this to this innocent thing? And then at the same time, you're just like, well, it's kind of right. Like, and so that moral ambiguity, the fact that it ends on such a sad, like, terrible note, and was impressive to me, because it let you sit in that emotion. And I appreciate shows that do that. And anime is one of those few mediums in my life that did that, because far too often, if you watch any show, any fashion, and even though you're going to get to a point, they always kind of try to end on like a clear, concise, we're drinking coffee and everything's happy. This one was like, I want you to sit in it. I want you to sit in the sad, and I want you to sit in this nastiness, because that's the world that this is, and it makes you even more invested in the story and the characters and the world and the lore and all that stuff. I thought it was just a massive.
I kind of found very early on. I've sort of found very early on in this this adventure that we're going on that
Right.
I don't know if this will hold true, because commercialism is rampant and you can't stop it. But I kind of feel like they really give the artists, and that means the writers and the actual artists, but I feel like they're given a lot of leeway to create without much interference. And it might be because so many of these are limited run. Yes, there are
Yes.
a few thousand episode
Yeah.
TV shows, but because they're so limited, there's not a danger in screwing something up because they know it's only a year or two. Whereas you know that when they're creating big budget, and here's the
Right.
key: the more money that's involved, the more people that get involved. So you
Mhm.
know when they're creating big budget movies in America or big
Yeah.
budget television, you know there's a think tank, and they
Right.
think out every option. And maybe the dude who has power at the studio for those few years
Mhm.
really hates sad endings, and he's like, guys, we can't fish like that. You know, you gotta make it happier, make it more smiley. The
Mhm.
kids will run away all scared. But I feel like with the anime that we've watched, as small as the sample size is, they're really given the freedom to run.
Absolutely. And that's not as common as you think. And in fact, I think of modern day anime that I see now, they follow very similar tropes. I think every anime
Oh, they do. Okay.
but that's now. But there's
Yeah.
also like those that still take leaps. They're going to probably come from smaller venues. They're probably going to come from smaller runs.
Hmm.
They still make their leaps. And I think I appreciate that you're seeing the totality that like they take risks in a lot of these shows. So what I'm going to lean into now is to kind of give you an understanding that when you go to watch the show further, when you go to watch the story as it is, how different the original 2003 anime was to the manga and Brotherhood. They're like leaps and bounds different from each other. And I told you some differences. One is that a lot of the stuff that happens post episode 4 actually kind of deviates for the most part from there. It actually deviates from that part of the story.
Okay.
You get to learn about, a different serial killer, but then they really tie into and so this is speaking about the 2003 anime more than anything, they really tie into the idea of soul binding to armor. So there's a lot more enemies that have a very, Alphonse-esque life in which they get tied.
So did they just
to armor.
have, for the 2003 version, did they just have the loose concept and then they sort of ran with their own adventures?
Correct. And they were kind of misadventures. I would say that a lot of them were one shots. It was like, I told you about the one about the gentleman who was trying to transmute his wife back, and they, and mistreating and understanding the idea of beauty, and also like, here's the thing, like, you'll find that the government has, you learn about what homunculus are, which are human beings created by alchemy. In the anime that you're going to find here, the lusts, the gluttonies of the world, you'll find that they're extensions of the central antagonist. Not to go too far into it, that's what you're going to be experiencing now. But in 2003, the alchemists were, anytime an alchemist did human transmutation and failed, much like Alphonse and Edward did, they became homunculus after that. So that's a completely, for a central theme of the show, it was completely different just in total characterization. So, for example, that monster that you met that was the transmutation of the Elric brothers' mother is completely a non plus at that point. Like, it's just a thing that they did. They wish they didn't do it. They bury it. It's dead. In the FullMetal Alchemist 2003 anime, that becomes one of the homunculus gang. And she becomes the episode. I think she's Sloth, and she becomes this creature that can mutate herself through water and stuff like that. But that is so different than what the anime now is and what you're going to be experiencing in. You're going to be like, wait, what? What's happening? Because everything is so different. And I remember experiencing it for the second time and being like, the anime in 2003 really tried to do episode 4 over and over and over and over again.
Oh, like just sort of beat you over the head with that type of depth until you couldn't.
Theme. Yes, be with that theme of like the God complex of science, the issue of morality, the issue of this thing, and they just kept pushing it, and it was great. The storytelling was amazing in 2003, and when you get to 2009, it becomes more of an adventure. The world expands a little bit more. You learn more about the Ishval War. You learn more about another country that does a different form of alchemy. You learn more about the different homunculus and where they come from. You learn about Father. You learn more about, so I think for me, I think it's just as important to understand 2003 as it is for 2009 because it's a good representation of like when you have such a good idea, you can make it work in 3 or 4 different directions. And in this case, it did. I love the 2003 anime. I'm one of the few people I feel that bought the Conqueror of Shambhala movie DVD. So when they ended the story, the 2003 anime ended on a movie, and I bought it. I actually got it for Christmas. My mom was like, "What is this?" Imagine getting a Christmas list from your child. And normally,
what is this?
She's like, okay, my son wants an Xbox. He wants this, and he wants FullMetal Alchemist, Conqueror of Shambhala. What is my son into? Like, it's that kind of stuff. But I really wanted a conclusion to the 2003 anime, so that's just kind of.
It's like, Kyle, is this the Devil's movie?
Right. It's like, what is my son into? What's a Shambhala, and why is he being conquered? You know, why is FullMetal? What is? And then you got like, and then someone who's an American who reads the name FullMetal Alchemist, you're like, is that anything like FullMetal Jacket? Like, what is this thing? And I remember that very distinctly. That like, I feel like I got such a conclusion and satisfactory ending of 2003. That I was willing to do it all over again in 2009, which is just a crazy thing that you don't get.
Right, but it ended up being an entirely different adventure, so you didn't really do it over. You had the same lead, and the similarities kind of ended around there.
Right, but that's the courage it takes to be like, I know these two things diverted, and we did the best we could with it. Can we give that another try, and we'll stay? And they stayed so true to the manga. I'm like, that to me just shows you how good this property is for anybody who wants to start it, you know? And I think that to me is a really important piece to take out of the show. So if you were to say, what are some great mysteries that you want to learn from, what are some questions that you got from the show?
Okay.
How can I geek out? Because I probably thought the same thing.
Okay. So not to beat a dead horse, but as everyone knows, a group of friends have gotten Kyle to start reading Harry Potter, right? And the first book in the Harry Potter series in America was known as the Sorcerer's Stone, but that's not actually the proper title. They thought that American kids were not intelligent enough to understand what a philosopher was, so the actual appropriate title is Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. Well, starting in episode 3 of FullMetal Alchemist Brotherhood, we see the appearance of the idea of their Philosopher's Stone, which I thought was very interesting. I don't know if there's a legitimate historical legendary text regarding Philosopher's Stones. I didn't Google it. I didn't look it up. In Harry Potter, it was a stone that could create the elixir of life and provide for eternal life. In FullMetal Alchemist, I'm starting to understand it as something that could amplify your powers. To quote Spinal Tap, it takes your volume and turns it up to 11.
It's the game. It's the game genie of alchemy.
It's the game genie.
You can just plug. It allows you to like whatever rules you can say. You can say screw it. I don't.
Right.
I could just I don't have enough of this thing to make a bigger thing. Don't worry, I got a Philosopher's Stone that makes it all better. Like it allows you.
Right. So I'm really intrigued to see that storyline because obviously Edward and Alphonse would love to get their hands on one because they think it'll make it all that easier to get their lives back somewhat or their bodies back. But then what really confused me is that at the end of the 3rd episode, the person who was utilizing this ring, it was this little red stone that they had on their ring finger, it broke, probably due to overuse, but he keeps referring to it as a fake. So now I'm like, okay, if that was a fake, what the hell was it? Because it was clearly giving him power. So the first rule of alchemy is you cannot create something out of nothing. For something to be created, something else must be taken. So in a lot of the animation, for example, when you see one of the characters create a stone wall in front of them, you actually see the asphalt ground get torn up to create this wall. So it's taking matter to creating a new matter. So when he had this ring on, he was able to do like magician tricks and create things without taking other matter. So it's not a Philosopher's Stone that we know of, but it is something that's more powerful. So that like caught my eye.
I love that.
Now I allow you to geek upon me.
Well, no, actually, the Philosopher's Stone and the Law of Equivalent Exchange is such a central theme to this show because it really bumps up against the idea of what an alchemist is, right? An alchemist wants to play God. It wants to mess nature to its whims, but it still is stuck within the bounds of science. And I love that idea. And I love that the Philosopher's Stone is this thing that they try to gain so that they can game that rule, so they can break the rule of nature that they're trying to get. But I think that's great that you love because in actuality, just to kind of flush on something you said, and something that I think is really interesting about the show, is that alchemy was a real science at one point. It actually was the precursor to science and chemistry. They thought the idea of, what we now consider chemistry, of like bonds and electrons and protons and neutrons, they considered it a little bit more ephemeral, a little bit more spiritual. And so they thought, using the science that they had, that they could do things like changing gold into lead into gold, or, doing all this extra stuff. And the Philosopher's Stone was also that idea, was the idea that you could kind of tap into some sort of spiritual power that made you start. So, and knowing that if it wasn't for alchemy, we wouldn't have science as we have it now, is something that doesn't get talked about as well. Like science, the scientific method came from alchemy. It came from
but at the same time, because you say like alchemy was science before we truly had the scientific method, which makes me think that alchemy is just like, it's like 92% science and 8% it's a little bit magic.
Yeah. Because if you think about it, like most things in the world that like wasn't explained was explained through magic. Like, was it like the Vikings thought that when they saw the lunar eclipse, that they thought that Fenrir the wolf ate the sun, or ate the moon. And so like,
can I just say, you just blew my mind, because the werewolf's name in Harry Potter is Fenrir Greyback.
Yep.
And I never knew that came from Viking lore.
Garrett, this is one thing that anime. This is one thing that we're going to probably touch upon in a different episode. Is that anime touches all mythologies. They like to dive into different, cultures. They like to dive into different time periods, and so they'll use like names and titles from like actual things that existed in the world. And so, FullMetal Alchemist does a really good job of, as much as many other anime, of like actually tying it to something that really existed. If that magic was real, this is what it would look like. It would look like, only a concentrated amount of people could practice this thing for the goal of the government to subjugate others. And it was a really cool way of doing it. So I'm really excited for you to learn about the Philosopher's Stone. I'm also interested for you to dive more into the homunculus, because you only got to really see a piece of them in the third episode. You got to meet lust and gluttony. As that gives away, the homunculus, there's 7 of them. They're all named after the 7 deadly sins. Lust.
They are not, in fact, via the 2003 version, a never-ending army of people being created.
Right, which makes me think that, like, what would have happened if an 8th person got made? You'd be like, hi, you're gluttony, you're lust, you're,
Gluttony
don't pay your taxes. Doesn't flush when he peed. Like, what would you do?
For those familiar in New York City, the one that stands on the toilet when they goes to the bathroom. That's what you are.
That's what you are. Like, this one is like an actual like human failure. You're just something I don't quite like.
Funny.
What would you do if you ran out, like, because I'm sure more than 7 people transmuted a human at one point. And if they're mortal, like the show makes it seem, is like
one other thing that caught my eye that I'm interested in is, of course, our protagonist is going to be more powerful than everyone else. That's why this show is based on him. That's why we're watching this show.
Yeah.
But most people who create alchemy, and I hope the show sticks to this and it just doesn't become sort of like a background thing, but in order to create their alchemy, no matter how good they are, they have to use, or I think create, a transmutation circle. And the best way I could describe it is a logo on the ground. It appears to me, the noob, that sometimes it's a permanent logo, but it's also something that you can draw upon the ground that looks almost like a pagan prayer symbol of some kind, that from which you can draw your power. And part of what makes Edward, the lead, so powerful is that he doesn't need these transmutation circles. He can summon his powers without them, which of course saves him time, but also impresses the hell out of everyone else that he comes along. So I'd be interested to hear that fleshed out a little bit as we move forward.
Why he doesn't need that, and knowing that, like, even if you did get a cool power out of it, that it came at such a crazy cost is one of those things. Like, is it worth it at this point? So I'm really excited for you to do this. Like, as someone who really enjoys this anime, like, I will tell you that if you liked the emotional reticence that you got from 3 and 4, I don't mind. I think watching 2003 would be probably up your alley, especially if you don't have like the time to watch 5 seasons of Brotherhood. But also if you're willing to dive.
Oh no, I can't hop out now. I got to do Brotherhood all the way. No.
Good, awesome.
I can't like hop back and then like if I watch them, I have to watch both, and I have to watch Brotherhood to completion first.
Right, and then go back to. Well, I think that's perfectly fine. So. But knowing that you have the ability to do it is awesome, and it was one of the things that really got me excited about anime as a whole. So I'm excited for you to get to that point, and when you get to the point of like explains what the Philosopher's Stone is, or you explain what homunculus, I'm gonna be like, tell me more. How did you feel? How did you? It's kind of a real. It's exciting to vicariously live that experience that you had. For me, it was like easily 15 years ago. Over again with you, man. So I appreciate you taking that dive and that you're willing to go for it. So I think that leads us into our scores. Let's talk about FullMetal Alchemist Brotherhood. So again, the Weeb score is how important it is to the medium, how's important it to you if you're an avid watcher to your overall digest. For a noob, it's is there a lot of barriers to entry? Is there limitations to get to this, or is this something you can pick up as a new person? And if you were just alone in the room with this thing, could you like it? And so for me, I give this a Weeb score of 9.5. I'm going to save my 10 for something that blows my mind now, because this is I only subtract points because I've watched it so long ago. So now I'm just it's now a memory to me. It's like a mosaic of a memory that I had as a kid of really appreciating it. So, and when a new one comes out that gives me that same feeling that FullMetal Alchemist Brotherhood does, I will give that a 10. But for now I'm going to give it a 9.5. So what is your new score?
I don't want to be like that jerk teacher who's like, well, perfection is unattainable. So I can't possibly give it a 10. But no, I would absolutely give it a 9.5. I do not think it is approachable if you don't have some backstory to it. Even if someone were to say, Kyle, I'm about to watch FullMetal Alchemist, what should I know? If you can rein in the geekdom, if you can rein in your anime boner, and you can just sort of give them the overview of what an alchemist is and the powers, I think that alone would allow someone to sort of hop in anywhere. Of course, it will depend on the episode, whether it's, one of the adventure episodes, which are not fluff, but they might not be as central to storyline. But I think in terms of depth, I mean, I loved Cowboy Bebop almost not for its lack of depth, but to me it was like a Western, and Westerns were not always regarded for their incredible their incredible storylines. It's sort of like a genre that stirs something in you, something visceral that maybe isn't like
a superhero. You get to deify this one character and watch them vicariously.
Right. That's
stumble and succeed without even trying.
Right.
Edward and Alphonse, they get their teeth knocked in for the entire show. They are struggling. They're not a hero that it's gonna come easy to them. While they're intelligent, while it seems like they are divine, they have divine right by which they can understand this very complex thing. They are going to get their butts kicked the entire series, and you're going to be very happy you were there for it, because it shows growth, and it shows, it's a very good like growing up story at the very least, because that's the one thing is you were saying there's the barrier to entry is that you literally have to start from one. You can't jump in the middle of it, because then you're going to be like, why is that guy snapping and flames are appearing? Why is that guy all of a sudden shirtless and punching walls and now they're getting bigger? Like, I don't get it. And why are they doing that? And why are they allowed to do that? Like that kind of stuff. It's
imagine someone who was like, I was flipping through the channels the other day and I saw Lost was on, so I decided to dive in. And you're like, oh, cool. So like, you started off at episode 1. They're like, no, it was I don't know, some point in season 4. What's the Dharma Initiative? And you're like, you fool! What have you done?
What have you done? No! I could just see like a camera screen pan out. So I was like, no!
and then you just see a photo of Jacob scowling into it. That's a Lost reference for people who watch Lost. Oh my lord.
So good. So that means it's got high marks for both a new and old and avid watcher. It's currently on Netflix, right? Or did you watch it on Netflix?
Hulu.
So
I watched it on Hulu Live.
You can watch it on Hulu without any issue, and it's still all the seasons
Right.
from last time I checked. So I try to pick anime that are easy accessible. If I can't find it, I try to get it to them somehow. So
Right, and you know, I'm eager to move forward because I feel like you've really given me some cool stuff to start with. Of course, you know, the titans of the genre in Cowboy Bebop and FullMetal Alchemist. We went a little, a little bit more.
So it's weird to go
risque
to have like a Sora no Toshimono or Monster Musume like sandwich with like the actual legitimate episodes, but
so every time I log into Hulu now, Monster Musume is still in like my recently watched list, and like my wife sits
Busty
next to
Snakes
me,
is like,
and it's like a busty snake creature is like the
yeah.
screenshot, and I'm like, let me watch another episode of Scrubs to like push this down like the list.
That's all. It's like because you can't really like it's not like a brow. It's weird that like you have to feel bad about it, but like at the same time, it's like clear search history. How do I do that?
It's like when like someone if you know someone comes over to like look at your computer and like you go in like the browser bar and you click the letter P and like Pornhub comes up across and you're like, oh,
whoops.
No.
Instead of this, but it's like it's even worse because it's like animated busty ladies. So, which also this show has in spades too. Like fan service exists even for the show, even as serious as it is. So, once again, this is going to conclude this episode of the Weeb and Noob podcast. What we watch anime together, and I want to hear your thoughts. I want to hear about what did FullMetal Alchemist mean to you? Did it make you a weeb like me? Did it put you into a cocoon, which then crystallized your fandom so that you emerged a beautiful Lunamoth of an anime fan? Tell us in the comments below so that we can talk about this. But until then, the law of equivalent exchange, that means that while I'm up watching FullMetal Alchemist, I also have to go to bed for equal amount of hours. So for that, we wish you all a fantastic week. We'll see you next time.
Take care, everybody.
If you like that episode, please push that subscribe button. And unlike Edward Elric, it won't cost you an arm and a leg.
Let me know what to watch in the comments down below. Whether it's a legendary anime or something off the beaten path, I want to hear what you have to say.